find my sheet now. Okay, so it's Patricia Harvey. Patricia's going to talk to us about the experiences, symptoms and health behaviours of menopausal women living in Ireland. And actually, Patricia, when I was talking to Anna about chairing this section of the day, she was going, it's going to be really interesting for nurses. We've got nurses talking and our final lectures on menopause. So I told her, it's not just nurses that get menopause. So we're looking forward to hearing you.
Thank you so much, and thanks to Anna and the committee for inviting me to speak here today. It's lovely to be here, and yes, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Trish. I'm a lecturer in the Technological University of the Shannon, and I'm also the lead in the SHE research group with the nutrition focus. So we're looking to address the gender gap in sport, health and exercise research. But we have one particular interest, particularly around menopause, and I'd just like to share some of our initial research findings. When we went looking around this area to begin with, there's very little data on the experiences of women going through menopause in Ireland. So, before we started looking at, lifestyle interventions and things like that, we wanted to see what was out there. So we had to go out and start doing some research to start that all off. So back in 2021, we did a huge online survey where 855 women completed an online survey asking them to share their experiences of the menopause, whether they were perimenopausal or postmenopausal women. And again, this was all done online, and women were asked about their symptoms as well as their experiences, and we started to also ask them about some of their lifestyle habits as well. What was really interesting was that menopausal symptoms were really interfering with the lives of women. They talked about the different symptoms, and we look at some of them in later slides. But there was always, for most women, there was some sort of interaction every day. And what really did come through, and in a lot of the subsequent research we've done so far, we really saw that women felt that they lacked knowledge going into menopause, and they felt unprepared. And this really was quite stressful for women, especially when they reflected back on, say, their times in their 40s and maybe early 50s. They really didn't know what was going on, what was happening to them. Women talked about, thinking that they had brain tumours, different things like this. And again, it was this, they did not know what was happening. And when we asked them again, where were they getting their information from, the majority of women were getting this information around menopause on social media sites and online. And really, they weren't going to their GP or government websites. They were much lower down on the list. So again, there was a lot of, felt a lack of information and a lack of preparation around that. My background is in nutrition, and I've done an awful lot of obesity research over the years, so I was also interested in this time of life and what was happening to women around this time. And around 80% of women reported that their weight was changing during the menopausal transition, and when they self-reported their height and weight, we could see that 66% of women were overweight or having obesity. And it sits very much in line with what we're seeing with populations anyway, but what we are seeing is that overweight and obesity is high in this particular group, and that women were finding it actually really difficult to manage their weight as well at this time. And we were also keen to understand their interest with regards to lifestyle programs and managing their menopausal journey and how they could do that better. And women really did talk about the fact that they really wanted more menopause education, more information around menopause, and how to manage their weight. Not necessarily to lose weight, but they were very keen to understand how to manage weight. And they were very keen to look at things like physical activity and incorporating other lifestyle changes such as mindfulness and meditation and Pilates and yoga into their lives. So from that initial study, we wanted to kind of delve a little bit deeper, and we went on to do another survey, this time with just over 300 women, about 150 perimenopausal and 150 postmenopausal women. And we asked them to rate their menopause symptoms using the menopausal rating scale. And this categorises symptoms into somatic, urogenital and psychological. They also self-reported their height and weight, and we also asked them about diet and lifestyle. And you can just see here, we've divided the women up. In the first slide, we're looking at perimenopausal women. And we can see here that the symptoms are down on the left-hand column, and then we have them divided into mild and moderate, and then we have severe and very severe in the right-hand column. And we can see there that, the symptoms that tended to impact women most were things like the sleep issues. And then if you look at things like physical and mental exhaustion, and also sexual problems, which came with things like desire. So again, you can see here, these are in the severe and very severe categories, and this is the percentages with mild and moderate symptoms. So most women overall were experiencing symptoms during menopause, because if you add these two columns up, you then get the remainder are those women who are not experiencing those symptoms. So women are experiencing a range of symptoms to a range of different levels of severity. And when we looked at those women, just to let you know as well that there was about 17% in that group that were using HRT. When we looked at the postmenopausal women, what was interesting was that a lot of these very severe symptoms were starting to come down, and we were starting to see less of the problems around around sleep issues were dropping down, the exhaustion was dropping down. So those things were quite encouraging, that after menopause as such, women's severe symptoms were starting to decrease at that stage. And just when we kind of categorise them in the different categories, you can see here when we look at these women, they're divided into perimenopausal and postmenopausal women, and we have now categorised, bringing together the different symptoms for the urogenital subscale, the somatic subscale, and the psychological subscale. So what you see here is that what's interesting is that when it comes to perimenopausal women, that it is the psychological symptoms that seem to be most severe compared to the other types of symptoms that we would normally kind of associate with menopause. The hot flushes and the night sweats, they're there, but they're not as significant as some of the other categories. And this was just particularly interesting with this group of women. What was also interesting as well was we also asked them to report on body, on height and weight, so we looked at BMI as well. And when we start to look at weight and those symptoms, what is starting to be interesting is that when you categorise the perimenopausal women by normal, overweight and obese, you can see that their menopausal rating scale, so the higher the score is, the more severe and the more symptoms they're experiencing. What we start to see is that as weight goes up, those symptoms are more severe and they are more symptoms are happening. We start to see a similar pattern also then with the postmenopausal women. As weight increases, those symptoms also start to increase. Now, this is an observational study, so what we don't know is the cause and effect. We don't know whether weight is causing more symptoms and an increase in severity of symptoms, or are women who are likely to be experiencing a more severe menopause more likely then to maybe stop exercising, maybe eating more, and therefore putting on weight. So it's one of those things that we need to investigate further, but we are seeing those sorts of relationships occurring. And what we did after that then was we really wanted to kind of get behind this data. We wanted to understand what was actually happening with women and the experiencing they were having around the menopause. So we did some qualitative work. The first study was looking at menopausal symptoms with reference to symptoms, body shape changes, perception of weight, and managing that weight and those symptoms. So we did 17 Zoom interviews. This was all during Zoom or COVID, so everything had moved online again. So it was a great opportunity to do this research in participants around the country. So several themes came out from this research, and we're just in the process now of publishing it. But the first major theme that came out when it came to menopause and weight and body shape was that menopause was having a huge impact on women's lives. This woman talks about it affecting her confidence, it's affected her at work, it's had a huge effect, and also it's taken her by surprise. And this keeps coming through with the data when we talk to women. There's all of these symptoms, but they weren't expecting it, and they weren't expecting to be knocked for six by different things. The things that they thought were going to happen didn't happen, and vice versa. They also talked about their weight and how their body shapes were changing. And this was something that women talked about in the sense that they were used to talking about their weight and they were used to being on diets. But during menopause, this was really, really different. That weight was much harder to shift. They didn't have their bodies were changing and the weight was changing. It was starting to go on around the middle. Their body shape was changing. And this was, again, taking them by surprise, and they didn't like this as such because they were becoming the cliche of the older woman. So this was very hard for them to deal with and for them to manage. And they were trying to constantly make sense of what was going on, especially with their body shape. They were thinking, you know, am I going mad? What's happening here? Why am I putting on this weight? I'm doing the same as I did 10 years ago, but nothing, you know, everything's different now. And again, you know, their body image was changing a lot during this time. And women felt very much disgusted by their bodies. They talked about their body shapes changing, that this excess weight was going on around the middle. And they just felt that they lacked confidence, they lacked that esteem, and it was having a huge ripple effect in different parts of their lives. So also, when they tried to think about managing that weight and those weight changes, they talked about those challenges during the menopausal transition. They talked about the fact that, you know, that they were obviously, life had changed, they were getting older, but they felt that they were more tired now. A lot of the symptoms of menopause were kind of impinging on their ability to make those changes. So they talked about, you know, and again, the other thing that was coming through with a lot of our research was that a lot of women's taste changes were happening as well with menopause. They had a bigger affinity for sweet foods, that things that they hadn't craved before, they were starting to crave now. And this was all making it very, very challenging when it came to managing their weight and putting on weight. And again, there was also that psychological element that was going on behind the scenes as well. It was this sort of, what's the point? Why bother? I'm just getting older now. I'm not attractive. There's no point in making these changes. And this was all part of these conversations that these women were having. But what was coming through was that women were very much aware of how lifestyle could potentially help them. And a lot of women were actively engaging with trying to make changes in their lifestyles, whether that was, you know, trying to eat a little bit more healthily. A lot of women talked about being more mindful around eating and eating for their health as opposed for appearances. And also women talked very much about, you know, the importance of exercise and physical activity. And this was more even for, not necessarily for weight or weight management, but it was really for the psychological benefits. Women really felt that, you know, those symptoms of menopause, like full of rage and things like that, that walking and exercise were really, really beneficial. So they were starting to incorporate that into their days. So in summary from this study, really what we saw very much so was that the menopausal experience for women is extremely different. And, you know, its weight and body shape is extremely different from before. And women have an awful lot of challenges around this time of life. We talk about women having, you know, being stuck in the middle. They're minding children as well as maybe an older generation. There's career issues and challenges around that, and there's an awful lot that they're juggling. So there's a lot of other priorities that are taking place. And for a lot of women, they are engaging with physical activity and trying to incorporate different changes. But it's important that we start to think about that when we start to maybe design or look at how to help women going through these stages. But we really were very, very interested because so many women talked about the benefits and what they were getting from exercise. And, you know, weight change and weight management is challenging enough, but also at this stage of life, you're now also at increased risk of lots of other chronic diseases. So physical activity was a really important thing that we really wanted to investigate a little bit further. And so we got funding from Sport Ireland to do yet another piece of qualitative work looking at how women are engaging with physical activity at this stage of life. So again, this was qualitative interviews that were conducted online, and we did 8 of these with a range of women between the ages of 46 and 56 years. And when we asked women about exercise and engaging in physical activity, we first of all wanted to look at what was motivating these women, what was pushing them or driving them to engage with physical activity, because we wanted to see if this was different to what happens in other groups and other population groups. And women very much talked about their health and their future health. They were they were seeing their older parents and they didn't want to be them. They wanted to protect themselves against that. But then they were also talking about their young children and how they wanted to be around for them and to be, you know, engaging with those kids and that as well. So this was very different. What was driving them to engage with physical activity wasn't about appearance. It wasn't about their immediate health. It was the future perspective. Other women were also very much motivated by the actual trying to manage menopausal symptoms. It really was so important that they were engaging with physical activity. For a lot of women, they talked about physical activity helping with symptoms. And for a lot of women, they felt that by being active, it was preventing them from actually experiencing more severe symptoms. They really did feel that physical activity was, you know, keeping away some of the severe symptoms that they would be that they'd hear people talking about. The other thing that was motivating this group of people, and this is what we would find in any sort of group, was that family and role models were really important. Of course, Davina McCall made a few appearances in some of these interviews, but what was really interesting was that, you know, a lot of people talked about wanting to, you know, work out, but it was their family that they were working out with. This lady here, you know, was talking about having somebody to go with. She's actually talking about going to the gym with her son. So again, it was, you know, family, husbands, partners were really important in, you know, kind of getting people to engage. And that sense of, you know, achievement was really important for women. They wanted to, you know, engage with physical activity, and that there was a sense of fun around it and that they really enjoyed it. And again, you know, there's humour always comes through with all of these interviews, you know. But it's really lovely to see that this is what was driving women to keep participating in physical activity. Now, what were the things that actually helped them then to engage with that physical activity? What needed to change for those women to keep engaging? And for a lot of women, they had to adapt. They couldn't do what they used to do. You know, for a lot of women, it was things like, you know, they were time restricted. They maybe didn't feel as fit as they did when they were younger. So they had to adapt to all of that. And what really was interesting was that when the environment was supportive, women were more likely to engage with physical activity. So this woman here is actually talking about bringing her kids to training sessions with the GAA, but the GAA had actually put a walk around the pitch, and because that was now there, she was now starting to exercise, and it's just lovely. We're near the pitches, and what they've done very cleverly is put paths around everything. So when you drop them off, now you can walk around the pitch. Like, that makes a huge difference. So I would never have thought of that until I thought, Jesus, while I'm here, I might as well have a walk or a run. So this sense of the environment was there, it was supportive, and therefore they were likely then to engage with this. Also, what was really important to women was that exercise and physical activity opportunities were very much tailored for them, and that there was women-only spaces. They felt more inclined to engage if they felt that those people who were training them or were running sessions knew about menopause and could help women and adapt sessions for that. And the other thing that really helped women with regards to going back and keeping engaging with physical activity was this opportunity to talk about menopause. What was really coming through all the time was that women felt isolated through menopause, and that there weren't an awful lot of opportunities to talk. But women did talk when they were out walking with their friends. They talked when they went out for a run with somebody else. Somebody would throw in, I was feeling this, I felt that, and it was an opportunity to talk about menopause. And for them, this was really important. It was their one outlet to do that. The things that were stopping women from engaging with physical activity were what you would expect. Things like, the other last one actually here that I have up here as well, the thing that helps women through menopause to engage with physical activity was medical supports. So many women talked about things like antidepressants, HRT, the Mirena coil. All of these things were absolute lifesavers for helping them to actually engage with physical activity. They were having issues before, and that these health issues were preventing them from engaging with physical activity. But once they had these medical supports in place, they were more likely then to start engaging and keep going out and continuing. Like I said, the things that stopped women from getting involved in physical activity were those busynesses of life, but also those menopausal symptoms. When they felt they were too severe or overwhelming, it was something that meant that they were less likely to do that. Also, their changes in weight and body shape changes. They felt uncomfortable. For some women, it was these sorts of things were actually stopping them from engaging. And also when the environment was intimidating, and if there were safety concerns. And also, as they were going through menopause, a lot of women talked about this lack of confidence, and they would have a lot of self-doubt and not an awful lot of belief in themselves, and therefore less likely to feel that they could participate in classes or participate in physical activity. So again, these are just some really interesting things and nuances that, if we're trying to get women to engage with these sorts of things, that we need to tailor those sorts of supports to meet those needs. So moving forward, menopause, of course, is a unique time of life, and, if we're all lucky enough, we actually all get to go through it, but it's a different journey for every woman. And we really do need to take a holistic approach, but it's really important that, women are educated around menopause and given the supports that they need. And where we're moving forward now is by introducing tailored and targeted interventions. We're just in the process now of setting up a lifestyle supports program for women going through menopause to help them manage all of that, and bringing in not only the physical activity and the diet and the mental health supports, but also the education and that support between women that seems to be really, really important for women at this time. So I'd just like to thank everybody in the research group for their contributions to all of this, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Does anybody have any questions? I have one as well. Was your study before the whole... there's been so much awareness of menopause now, thanks to Joe Duffy and everybody else. Was your study pre that or after that?
The first study was before Joe Duffy, and after that it was... So there's a lot of biases within ourselves. We should be so careful with interpreting a lot of the data, because first of all, we had Joe Duffy come in at one stage, but then also COVID. Everybody, when they're talking in these interviews, they're saying things like, I didn't know whether I was eating more because of menopause or was I eating more because of COVID. So it was really confusing time, but that just shows how difficult it is to study and understand these sorts of things when there's so much confounding factors going on there as well.
Okay, Anna.
I was just wondering, a lot of people had a lot of challenges during their menopause. Was there anybody who didn't?
It's really interesting. When we start a lot of the interviews, because we did 17 interviews, and we were really keen to try to get a lot of women in that had a range of experiences. And women would start off the conversation saying, I've had no issues with menopause. I've had no real kind of symptoms or anything like that. And then, 10 minutes later, they're talking about waking up sweating in the middle of the night and not being able to sleep. And then they're talking it through with you going, do you think that was menopause? There's this lack of connect, but at the same time, we do know from research about maybe 20% of women go through menopause without having any kind of real significant experiences of symptoms. But I think what's interesting is that the classic symptoms that we associate with menopause are not necessarily what most people are experiencing. It's the anxiety, the rage, those other things that seem to be having an impact.
Thank you, Patricia. Really interesting talk. I'm Paula Hickey, and I'm a physician, and I've been through menopause. It's like an AA meeting. But you know, for me, it was an experience where I had so many penny droppings of, you know, women I would have seen over the last 20 years with like medically unexplained symptoms, and how much of that were actually perimenopausal symptoms in retrospect. My question and comment is, you know, with a significant percentage of women having very significant symptoms, and yet relatively small number on HRT. What were your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that, you know, obviously the HRT conversation is really kicked off, and I think more and more women are more kind of looking for those supports. I think obviously with some of the research that came out years ago, there's been that reservation around that. But, you know, again, in the first study we did, actually about 30% of those women were on HRT. So it just depends on you know, what that range is. But yeah, there's that sort of reluctance, I think, with a lot of women. But that is changing. And I think it's that whole idea that those supports can make life so much easier and then allow you to engage with all of these things, as opposed to thinking, I need to fix this on my own, you know. Yeah. So it's yeah.
Patricia, thank you. I'm wondering, did your study in any way also capture the experience with GB information? Because my personal one was devastating on that topic, and it was a female past her menopause, and she could name that I had flush periods, which I didn't know before. I couldn't give it a name. And I was irritated because all my life I had on the dot, very short, and suddenly you get every 3 days, every 10 days, and, you know, out of control. And then in the same moment, she names it, but she didn't then talk about menopause. She just told me, but the average age for menopause is 52.
Yeah.
I was 48 at that stage, but obviously it was at the end. Yeah. So that's why my question is, did you capture this GP?
We did, and that's actually in one of the studies we haven't published yet, but it's the anger towards the medical profession is quite intense with a lot of the interviews. The lack of recognition and support, and being quite dismissive, and you know, women really feeling that they had to go in armed with whatever information that they could to go in to fight their corner, you know, and that really, really comes through, because some interviews we almost couldn't get them to come around to talk about other aspects of the menopause for them. They were just so angry at not having access to HRT and a few other things like that. But it was different, and it was different for everybody. And then there was a lot of support that they felt was brilliant. So, but there was overwhelmingly. But then again, it's self-selected, so women that come forward to talk to us could obviously have an issue with that to begin with, you know, that they had had a bad experience, and they're more likely then to engage in the research. So, yeah.
It was really interesting. I've always been interested in BMI as a measurement and how it's constructed, and it's in, you know, the fact that the significant majority of the women that you were working with, about nearly all of them, had BMIs over 25, and I'm wondering if that says something about BMI as a measurement and whether it's appropriate actually for the whole population, or is it designed with a particular person in mind, and what might the implications of people being told, because doctors and other medical practitioners often make judgments based on BMI and say, oh, well, you're overweight or you're obese. Therefore, you know, when in fact it might not be actually meaningful at all for particular populations.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And like BMI as a generic population tool is quite useful. But at the same time, we do know as weight increases, we see these associations. But what we actually are doing now is we now have a new study starting after Christmas where we're looking at central obesity, because it's more likely that, you know, central obesity, visceral fat is what we're more, that will be showing a better correlation. But again, and waist circumference circumference and those sorts of things are probably better indicators than BMI. BMI is very crude, but it's so handy and easy to measure that's why it's been in place for so long.
How you doing? Can I just ask why the antidepressant medication is classified as one of the go-to initial treatments when it's known to have the side effect of weight gain, and yet we're proposing the benefits of physical activity?
Well, I suppose with the antidepressant medication, a lot of the time when we look at this research, women who are prescribed antidepressants usually have had depressive episodes before they've even come into menopause. So obviously that's a decision that's made with the GP if mood and anxiety and those are so severe that has to take precedence. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. Yeah. True. But the other side of it is that trying to lose weight is extremely difficult, and we just know that weight loss usually doesn't happen for a lot of people. It's very difficult to reverse. So it depends on the situation. But antidepressants being used are something that it's happening more and more frequently. But I think more and more women now are looking to get HRT instead of antidepressants. They are questioning why they're being prescribed antidepressants when they could